The sirens pierced through the stillness of the night in Ouagadougou, a sound no one ever wants to hear. Mothers clutched their children tighter, fathers peered through cracked windows, and in the silence between alarms, one question echoed in every home. Is this the beginning of war? Just hours later, Burkina Faso would uncover one of the most dangerous plots in its modern history, a plan so audacious it could have turned the heart of West Africa into a battlefield. At the center of it all stood one man, Ibrahim Traoré, the young leader who has become both a symbol of defiance and a target of immense pressure. Picture this: 57 trucks crawling through the darkness toward the border, their cargo hidden under tarps, moving under the cover of night. But beneath those tarps were not tools for farming or equipment for schools. They carried death, tens of thousands of assault rifles, crates of grenades, anti-tank weapons, and enough explosives to rip a nation apart. The kind of firepower that could turn a peaceful city into a wasteland overnight. Why would anyone ship this arsenal into a country already struggling to maintain stability? Who paid for it? And what does this mean for Africa's future and for the global balance of power? These are not just political questions. For families across the Sahel, this is a matter of life and death. One misstep and the entire region could descend into chaos. Stay with us, because in the next few minutes, you'll hear the shocking details, numbers, names, and motives that the mainstream media won't touch. And as we dig deeper, ask yourself, who really benefits if Burkina Faso burns? Before we dive in, I want to hear your thoughts. Who do you think is behind this? A foreign government? A shadowy corporate alliance? Drop your ideas in the comments, because this is a conversation Africa and the world needs to have. If you believe the truth matters now more than ever, make sure to stay with us until the end. What we're about to reveal could change the way you see Africa forever. On the morning of August 22nd, 2025, Burkina Faso woke up to news that sounded like something out of a spy thriller, except it was real, and the stakes were life or death. Security forces intercepted a massive convoy near the Malian border. Inside, they discovered what every African government fears: an arsenal big enough to ignite a civil war. The numbers were staggering. Investigators counted 42,000 assault rifles, 3,600 grenade launchers, over 2 million rounds of ammunition, and anti-aircraft systems capable of taking down military helicopters. This wasn't the work of small-time smugglers or rogue traders. It was a deliberate, well-financed operation with one objective: destabilize Burkina Faso. Government sources later revealed that the convoy originated from ports linked to companies operating under foreign contracts that were supposed to deliver agricultural equipment and construction materials. Instead, they were moving instruments of death. And here's the part that makes this story even darker. Documents recovered from the trucks suggest that the plot wasn't just about Burkina Faso. There were maps, detailed routes, and payment logs pointing toward a much larger network spanning 3 West African nations. To understand the gravity of this, you have to remember what's at stake. Burkina Faso is not just another African country. It's a front line in a generational fight for sovereignty. For decades, foreign powers and multinational corporations have controlled the lifeblood of Africa: gold, uranium, oil, while leaving its people in poverty. Under Traore, that script changed. He kicked out foreign troops, reclaimed mining rights, and dared to say what others whispered: Africa does not need permission to be free. And that's when the threats began. I knew something was coming, says Abdoulaye, a 63-year-old farmer from the northern region. But I didn't know it would be this. Abdoulaye's story is like thousands of others. Families who just want peace, who have buried too many sons in wars they didn't start. When I heard about the weapons, I thought, why us? Why now? His voice breaks as he recalls the fear in his grandchildren's eyes. Experts believe the weapons were financed through shell companies tied to offshore accounts, making the operation nearly impossible to trace. But one thing is certain: this was not a gamble. It was a calculated strike aimed at undoing years of progress toward African self-determination. Intelligence sources indicate that the convoys were timed to coincide with political tension, hoping to turn local frustrations into full-blown insurgencies. If these weapons had reached their destination, the entire Sahel region could have plunged into chaos within weeks. If you're watching this and wondering why the truth about Africa rarely makes headlines, ask yourself, who benefits from your silence? Stay with us, because the next part will reveal why this operation was more than just smuggling. It was a declaration of war for Abdoulaye. These aren't just headlines. They're nightmares that never seem to end. I've seen my country suffer since I was a child, he says quietly. But this feels different. It feels like they want to break us. His words echo the fears of millions who see Traoré as their last hope for dignity and security. But the story doesn't end here. The weapon seizure was just the beginning. What followed would shake not only Burkina Faso, but the entire African continent. International boardrooms, foreign embassies, and secret intelligence rooms are now on high alert, questioning how far Traoré is willing to go and how far his enemies will go to stop him. But what triggered this confrontation? Why now, and who is really pulling the strings? Stay with us because the answer will shock you. The tension in Ouagadougou reached a breaking point when Ibrahim Traoré took the floor at the emergency summit. For days, speculation had swirled about what his next move would be after the African Union had resisted Burkina Faso's urgent calls for real support. Cameras were rolling, delegates seated in their polished chairs, expecting another round of diplomatic pleasantries. Instead, what they witnessed was a declaration that shattered decades of protocol. Traoré announced that Burkina Faso would no longer recognize any AU resolutions that undermine national sovereignty. He declared that foreign-controlled mining contracts were officially void, effective immediately. The room fell silent, and for a brief moment, even the interpreters stopped speaking. This was not just rhetoric. This was a line in the sand, drawn in front of the entire continent. Within hours, the streets of Ouagadougou erupted, not in chaos, but in raw emotion. Thousands gathered in Independence Square, waving Burkina Faso's flag high in the air. Some were crying, others were singing songs of liberation passed down through generations. Mothers clutched their children, whispering prayers of gratitude, while young men hoisted banners reading, "Africa for Africans." One elderly man, his voice trembling as he spoke to a local journalist, said, "I have lived through coups, famines, and wars. Today, for the first time, I feel we might control our destiny." His words captured the essence of the moment. A nation long held back by external forces, now daring to seize its future. But this wasn't a celebration without fear. Across social media and on the ground, questions spread like wildfire. Would foreign corporations retaliate? Would powerful nations cut off aid? A small farmer named Issa summed up the anxiety perfectly. "I'm proud of our leader, but what happens if they punish us? What happens to our children?" That mix of pride and uncertainty defined the mood in Burkina Faso. For every cheer, there was a worried glance toward the horizon. International reactions were swift and polarized. Some African leaders quietly applauded Traoré's courage, while others condemned his move as reckless. Behind closed doors, AU officials scrambled to draft a response, but their usual language of gradual integration suddenly felt hollow. The press conference following the summit was a spectacle in itself. Reporters bombarded AU representatives with questions they struggled to answer. How could an organization claiming to fight for African sovereignty oppose a member state reclaiming control of its resources? Their evasive answers only deepened the sense that something historic had just unfolded. As night fell, Ouagadougou's main square was lit by thousands of candles. The scene was breathtaking. Families gathered, chanting prayers and patriotic songs. It wasn't just a political act anymore. It was spiritual, almost biblical in tone. People knelt, hands clasped, asking God to protect their leader and their land. For an older generation that remembered colonial rule, this night felt like redemption. For the youth, it felt like the beginning of a new Africa. Yet behind the songs and prayers lurked an undeniable truth. Traoré's bold step had placed Burkina Faso in uncharted waters. Every victory comes with a price, and the question on everyone's mind was, how high would that price be? Could the nation withstand economic sanctions or even covert attempts to destabilize its fragile progress? These were not abstract fears. They were real, and they were coming fast. Before you rush to judgment, pause for a moment and ask yourself, if you were in his shoes, would you risk everything for true independence? Or would you settle for the comfort of compromise? Think about that as we move forward, because what happens next will shock you. Will the world act in time, or will Burkina Faso face the greatest challenge in its modern history? When the sun rose the next morning over Burkina Faso, the reality of Traoré's bold decision began to sink in. In Ouagadougou's bustling markets, women carrying baskets of millet spoke in hushed tones about what lay ahead. Some smiled with pride, others whispered fears about rising prices. The government's annulment of foreign-controlled mining contracts sent shockwaves through the economy. Almost overnight, global commodity firms withdrew their staff, leaving mines deserted and thousands of workers uncertain about their future. For the people of Burkina Faso, this was more than a policy shift. It was a gamble with their daily bread. The political sphere was no less turbulent. Parliament erupted in heated debate. Opposition figures accused Traore of endangering the nation's fragile stability, warning that sanctions could choke essential imports. Meanwhile, his supporters hailed him as a savior, a man finally willing to break the chains that had bound Africa for decades. Security forces were put on high alert as intelligence reports hinted at possible infiltration by foreign-backed operatives. The government claimed that disinformation campaigns were already circulating on social media, designed to stir unrest. For a country that had endured years of coups and insurgencies, these developments were ominous signs of what could come next. Beyond the halls of power, the social fabric of Burkina Faso began to feel the strain. Farmers in rural provinces faced uncertainty as fuel prices ticked upward, threatening to erode their already slim profits. In Kaya, a small farming town north of the capital, a man named Musa stood beside his aging tractor, shaking his head. "We wanted freedom," he told a local reporter, "but freedom is expensive. Can we afford it?" His words carried the weight of a dilemma facing millions of ordinary citizens. How to balance the dream of sovereignty with the harsh arithmetic of survival. Yet amid the growing anxiety, a sense of unity emerged that Burkina Faso had not seen in generations. Neighborhood committees sprang up to organize food cooperatives and share resources. Churches and mosques held joint prayer vigils, asking for divine guidance in the days ahead. The streets, while tense, were also filled with songs of resilience. "If this is the cost of dignity, then we will pay it," read one banner carried by a group of university students marching peacefully through the city center. These scenes revealed a profound truth. When nations fight for sovereignty, the battlefield is not only in boardrooms or parliaments, it's in the hearts of their people. Internationally, the ripple effects were immediate. Financial institutions began reviewing aid packages. Rumors swirled that a major Western power was considering freezing Burkina Faso's access to certain banking systems. Meanwhile, African nations watched closely. Mali and Niger, already skeptical of traditional alliances, appeared emboldened, hinting at similar moves. Analysts warned that if this trend continued, the entire security architecture of the Sahel could unravel, creating a power vacuum ripe for exploitation by extremist groups. For families in Burkina Faso, however, the concerns were far more intimate. Will my children still have access to medicine? Will schools remain open if funding dries up? Will the dream of independence turn into a nightmare of isolation? These questions echoed across dinner tables, in church pews, and at market stalls. Each decision Traore made would carry consequences measured not in abstract policy terms, but in human lives. The government responded with a wave of new initiatives, fast-tracking local mining cooperatives, encouraging domestic food production, and appealing for African solidarity funds. But these measures take time, and time is the one commodity Burkina Faso does not have in abundance. Every day without external support increases the risk of shortages, unrest, and economic collapse. As night fell on Ouagadougou once again, the capital seemed calm on the surface. But beneath that calm ran a current of uncertainty and fear. Was this the dawn of a new Africa, or the prelude to another tragedy? Only time would tell, and the stakes could not be higher. But how will the United States respond to a continent that refuses to bow? Across the Atlantic, Washington was watching closely. The State Department convened an emergency briefing as reports of Burkina Faso's sweeping economic reforms hit global headlines. Analysts warned that Traore's decision to expel foreign mining interests could set a precedent far beyond West Africa. For decades, U.S. policy in the Sahel has been anchored in two pillars: counterterrorism, cooperation, and access to strategic resources. Now, one of the region's key players was signaling a willingness to break those arrangements, and that sent shockwaves through the corridors of power in D.C. American media outlets were quick to frame the story as a geopolitical earthquake. Some commentators called Traoré a reckless populist, while others labeled him a symbol of African sovereignty. Behind closed doors, however, U.S. officials faced a dilemma. Direct intervention risked reinforcing the narrative of Western dominance, a narrative Traoré was skillfully using to rally public support. On the other hand, doing nothing could encourage other African nations to follow suit, potentially unraveling decades of diplomatic influence in the region. Defense planners grew concerned about the implications for counterterrorism operations. With foreign bases already being shut down in Burkina Faso, could the U.S. maintain its strategic footprint in the Sahel? Losing access to key logistics hubs might not just weaken American influence, it could embolden extremist networks thriving in the region's vast ungoverned spaces. Meanwhile, European partners expressed alarm, fearing the collapse of long-standing economic agreements. France, in particular, saw its position eroding rapidly as former colonies reasserted control over natural resources. Financial markets reacted nervously. Gold prices spiked on rumors of supply disruptions, and multinational corporations began lobbying Western governments for a coordinated response. At the same time, voices within Africa grew louder, calling for solidarity against what they viewed as economic neocolonialism. The African Union, humiliated and divided, struggled to present a unified stance. For everyday Americans, the story barely made the evening news. Yet the stakes were real: energy security, counterterrorism strategy, and the credibility of U.S. influence in an increasingly multipolar world. Washington's next move could shape not just Africa's future, but the global order itself. Could this be the start of a crisis that redraws the map of international power? This moment in history feels bigger than a single country. What happened in Burkina Faso is not an isolated event. It is a tremor that could shake the foundations of an entire continent. When one leader dares to break old chains, others start to imagine freedom too. And that is what makes this moment so powerful and so dangerous. The truth is, Africa's story has always been shaped by outsiders. For decades, decisions that changed lives were made in boardrooms thousands of miles away. Deals were signed without the voices of the people they would affect. Resources were taken, and promises of prosperity were left unfulfilled. Burkina Faso's bold stand is a direct challenge to that history. It says no more. But history also teaches us something else. When nations rise to claim what is theirs, the response is rarely peaceful. We have seen it again and again. Countries that dared to challenge global powers face pressure, sanctions, and sometimes worse. Could that be what lies ahead for Burkina Faso? Will external forces allow this shift to stand, or will they move to restore the old order? These are not abstract questions. They could decide whether the Sahel moves toward independence or falls deeper into conflict. And let's be honest, the stakes are not just political. They are deeply personal. Think about the farmer in rural Burkina Faso who just wants his children to have food on the table. Think about the grandmother who prays every night for safety in her village. For them, this is not about ideology or grand speeches. It is about whether they can live without fear, whether their sons will grow up free or fight in endless wars. That is why this story matters far beyond Africa. It is a question of justice, dignity, and human survival. But here is something even more troubling. If this movement spreads, and signs suggest it will, it could redraw alliances, shake economies, and force the world to confront uncomfortable truths. Who truly benefits from Africa's wealth? Why has a continent so rich in resources remained poor for so long? These questions are not just African questions. They are global questions, and they will demand answers soon. Traore's challenge to the African Union has already exposed cracks in a system built on ceremony rather than substance. He showed that real independence is possible, and that makes every excuse for dependence look weak. But boldness comes with risk. Will Burkina Faso stand as a beacon of hope or become a cautionary tale? No one can say for certain. So I ask you this: is Ibrahim Traoré the hero Africa has been waiting for, or a man leading his country into uncharted danger? Will this spark ignite a new era of sovereignty or a storm of chaos? If this story moved you, let your thoughts be heard. Share your view in the comments. If you believe in justice, in freedom, in the right of every nation to shape its own destiny, stand with us. Like this video, share it with someone who cares, and subscribe so you don't miss the stories the mainstream media won't tell you. We will be here, uncovering the truths that matter. Until then, may God bless Africa, the land of strength, hope, and an unbreakable spirit. And may He bless you and your family, wherever you are, with peace and wisdom in these uncertain times.